Hello, everybody. It is July 27th, 2018. This is our bi-weekly SIG AWS meeting. We have a fairly full agenda, so we should probably get started on that. But if people do have more items for the agenda, please do add them. Otherwise, it seems unlikely that we will get to items that are not on the agenda. So if you do have items, please do add them. Otherwise, I suggest we jump right into it. Well, the first one is actually mine. It's actually hopefully a fairly quick question, which is this is relaying a request from Cluster API, which is a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. And the question or contention was brought up that whether or not when they're implementing the Machines API, whether they should be using auto-scaling groups or launching instances individually. And one of the factors that might help them figure that out, or us figure that out, is whether auto-scaling groups have different rate limits than launching instances via run instances. In other words, is there some private API or private rate limit that is different, or should we be able to get the same behavior? I don't know if anyone from AWS immediately knows the answer for that, but otherwise we can just sort of come back, I guess.
I would just say that autoscaling is a different service, so it definitely has different rate limits. I don't know them off the top of my head, but it would be a different experience for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so it is reasonable to believe. So the suggestion was that someone was saying that they could launch, say, 1,000 instances very quickly using auto-scaling, or faster using auto-scaling groups than they could using run instances. And sort of, is that plausible, or?
Yeah, it's totally plausible.
Yeah.
Since it is a different service. I don't know what would scale better, but I would imagine that auto-scaling would scale better.
Okay.
So if you want concrete numbers, we could reach out. We could take an action item to reach out to the auto-scaling team.
Even if they're the same rate limit, the fact that it's a separate API with its own rate, you wouldn't be impacted by other services hitting a common API. So it might be worth doing even if they're equivalent.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I will take that back, and I think the notion that there is a separate bucket is very handy, perhaps even more so than the actual details of the limits. Thank you for that. Next up, we have Micah, Pod Identity Working Group update.
Yeah, so last week we talked about just a little bit about kind of the different pod identity, basically AWS credential injection solutions. And we talked at the Pod Identity Working Group last week on Wednesday. And some of the guys from USwitch, and I think a couple of the other projects were there too. And we also talked about kind of our solution we're exploring. We're not totally, I wouldn't say we're committed to it yet, just because it's still kind of in process, but we want to do this out in the open so that everyone's up to speed on what we're working on. And I basically gave the same update last week, but on sort of our idea, but I just now kind of put it in a Google Doc, so that's available for public reading. And I just put the link in the meeting here. So if anyone wants to read that, has any questions, we can talk about it again next week if anyone has questions, or if anyone who read it already has questions now, I can answer those.
That's great. I have a question, which is, when does the Pod Identity Working Group meet, and when could, how do people join those discussions?
Sure, that's, I think, Wednesday at 10, is that right?
Every other week.
Every other Wednesday at 10. 10 Pacific.
And is it this Wednesday or the Wednesday?
It is not this coming week, but the following week.
Gotcha.
Is that right? Or was it this week?
I'm not sure.
I don't remember.
We only went to one.
Okay, Jordan put it in the chat. Let's see. Look in the meeting notes.
Next meeting
Double
is
check.
August 1st.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that's kind of where we are with that. I had a couple other questions, or just, I guess, public comments. So there's been a lot of, I've gotten a lot of more feedback about and just volume about NLB. And it's something that's kind of been, I did originally when I was just part of the community, not at AWS. And as the volumes turned up, that's something we want to support and move to V1 stable. So I commented on the Kubernetes feature issue. And the sort of target right now is to have sort of beta status as of 112, and then targeting, I guess, V1 stable for 113. And I attached a number of like known issues that are present to that feature issue of things we want to tackle. But if anyone has any bandwidth and wants to contribute, we'd really welcome that. So please speak up if any of those issues are something you want to take on or work on. We'd really appreciate and welcome that. And then I guess one other question I had for kind of people here is there's a couple of issues out just on load balancers in general that are kind of the same thing. And I kind of wanted people who have used load balancers take on and Kubernetes if this is something we should support or not. Basically, if you try to switch a Kubernetes load balancer service from internal to external, it doesn't work. If you try to switch a load balancer service from NLB to classic ELB or vice versa, it doesn't work. It's a destructive action. It deletes it would delete the load balancer, create a new resource. So is that something that we want to support, or just say that that's recreate your service? That's not a supported thing.
I think one clarifying point is because we're using an annotation, we have, I believe, no reasonable way to block the update.
Right.
I'm not even sure we could do it particularly easily anyway, without a sort of API extension or some sort of hook. But what is the behavior currently? Is it just that it silently fails to? What does it do?
I'm not sure entirely. I don't remember what the event message is or anything, but I think we could detect it and support it just because we could see what the current type of load balancer is and check on the annotation if it's supposed to be internal or external or network or classic. But that would just be again, potentially just like a destructive action that isn't necessarily obvious to the user. So I don't know if that's something we want to support. I don't know if anyone has any other feedback on that.
My gut feel, a sort of straw man suggestion would be to not support it initially, but try to surface it in events so that it's the behavior is reasonable and it says, in order we can't support a change, you have to delete and recreate or something like that. And then if people say, oh, that really sucks, then we can look at automating it from there. But if we have it where it surfaces reasonable events, that given our choices, that doesn't seem a bad option, because I agree with you that deleting and recreating is potentially surprising. Deleting and recreating the underlying resource is potentially surprising.
Right.
This has come up with the ALB ingress controller before, and so it does support changing that type and just destroying and recreating. So people opened up issues on it, from what I remember.
But for a if I were to switch from an ELB to an NLB, I would have to make another change, right, to my DNS, for example, unless I had the external DNS controller or something performing that automatically. It's not like in the absence of further machinery, there is still more work to be done, right? So it's never going to be a totally seamless transition.
Exactly.
Yeah, if I was a user and I had some kind of load balancer that was internal that I wanted to make public, I would expect to have some kind of blip in the service, right? I wouldn't expect that to happen without some kind of downtime.
Great. Yeah. I think having it, if we just say we don't support it, and like you said, having a readable event message, that makes it a lot easier for us, more seamless transition, so that you can create a secondary service, bring it up online, could do a cutover, and bring down the old one. Yeah. Okay. And then I had one other issue, but kind of after thinking about it, it's probably something I'll just move to sig-cloud. There's a pull request to remove like a cluster role bindings that are specific to AWS that get bootstrapped everywhere. But I'm thinking that we might want to have a discussion at sig-cloud to talk about just bootstrapping cloud-specific roles in general. I don't know that there's a real mechanism for that. So yeah, we'll move that discussion there.
That sounds good. As I recall, there is I don't know whether we have to do it, but there's a storage class that's specific to AWS and a similar one that's specific to GCE that is installed. So there is a set of manifests that every installation tool, I'm generalizing from COPS, but like I think that every installation and every installation tool should install based on the cloud. So it would be a matter of like maybe adding this RBAC binding to that manifest.
Great.
Yeah, cloud, I think, makes sense.
That's all I have.
Wonderful, thank you. Jordan, you have waited very patiently.
Yeah. So this is actually a long-standing issue that's been open for a while, and we're trying to kind of figure out a path forward here. So if you want to open it up, this is an issue talking about inconsistencies in the ways different cloud providers treat stopped instances. So you've started up some instances, they've registered node objects, and then maybe some labels got added to those, maybe some taints got added to those, and then one of those instances is stopped but not terminated. And while it is stopped, the node controller, if it happens to take long enough and notice, will actually treat that stopped instance as if it doesn't exist and will delete the Kubernetes node that corresponds to it, losing all the labels that were applied to it, any taints that were applied to it, any cordoning, all of these various things that can be on the object. And then when the node is, or the instance is started back up, it says, oh, well, let me re-register myself. And you kind of get back to clean state, initial labels, initial taints, whatever the clean state was. And so this is inconsistent across cloud providers today. And we're just trying to not necessarily boil the ocean and reach agreement on like every method in the cloud provider interface, but at least kind of stop the bleeding on the data loss and security implications of this. So AWS and OpenStack, I think, are the two ones I'm most familiar with that have this behavior of treating non-running instances as if they didn't exist. And it sounds like the OpenStack folks would like to converge to what GCE and some of the others are doing, where they leave them in place in a not ready state. And so I wanted to come to AWS and see what people were thinking here, and there were other perspectives, just so we can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have I have concerns about changing the behavior, like just casually. But I mean, there's been a lot. I think you're being thoughtful about how you do it, and I think that makes sense. And we also had I think the convergence argument is was previously blocked on sig-cloud, and we have sig-cloud now, so we can have that discussion there. But we can certainly figure out for AWS what we think makes sense.
Yeah.
I think in the past we've debated about what it means for an instance to be stopped. Like, why is an instance stopped, right? Like, what is the use case for stopping an instance? And particularly if you're going to significantly change its character, right? If you're going to start changing its instance type, is it the same node? I think was sort of where we got stuck last time, I think.
Yeah. I mean, in our case, we were stopping instances in order to work around a bug and looking up addresses and putting them on the instance. It could have just restarted the kubelet process, but ops had access to the dashboard, so they did it via the AWS dashboard. And they shut down an instance and then started back up. And in the meantime, it would get deleted and lose its labels and stuff. So, yeah.
But you can restart an instance, right? And that would have done the.
I don't know what their playbook was. I think they did a shutdown and then, but it doesn't actually matter because the state, if it's not in running state, it will treat it as if it doesn't exist. So it is only the running state that is treated as existing.
No, but I mean, I think so. Stopped is different from restarting. I think so. This is so. It would definitely be a bug if you just issued a restart, which is sort of like hitting the reset button on your desktop, right? And that sort of just does a cycle, like a reboot. That is very different from stopping it and starting it, which I think like stop is more like a hibernate, as I understand it, except without storing the disk. Stop is like a shutdown, and so it is different. And like for example, you are no longer charged when an instance is stopped, is my understanding.
I have a similar issue with my master nodes where they have like a memory leak, and every once in a while I have to just reboot it. But just doing the reboot doesn't like clear up the memory. I have to do a full stop, which actually gets terminated.
Yeah. So termination, like if you terminate and actually get a new instance ID, then you actually are a new instance, and I think it's appropriate to delete the node object. If you retain your instance ID and none of your characteristics have changed, then just because the controller happened to observe a shutdown state doesn't seem correct. In addition, that seems kind of racy. Like if we're depending on the node controller to notice that, then if you shut it down and change something and bring it back up quickly enough, the node controller can miss that, right? And so if we're depending on the node controller to notice that this shutdown state kind of in a poll loop and delete the node object in order to make something else work, then I think that other thing that it is quote unquote making work is probably fragile and vulnerable to kind of race conditions with the controller observing this shutdown state. So I think it would be good to know what those other implications are, but I think we should resolve cases where the node shuts down and comes up and it has different characteristics. We have to resolve that even if the node controller didn't observe the moment when it was in the shutdown state.
Well, it's stopped, right? It isn't. That's not to say shutdown, because I think shutdown can also be something else, right? Like you can. I think you can actually shut down an instance. Is it true that you can shut down an instance? You can. So many words. I think shutdown from you can do a shutdown command in Linux on your instance, and I think it will stay in the running state. Is that true?
I think that's when it goes to stopped, right?
What stopped was when you did it from the EC2 API, you issued a stop. I will try this. I think in general, though, we should drive it from the use case of why am I stopping the machine, and what do we expect? What is the person that's stopping the machine doing, and what then makes sense? And I think that's what we didn't really have clarity on to date. So if we could get clarity on that, then I think we could figure out what the correct operation is. There is certainly the operation that I'm most familiar with for when you stop a machine is when you are changing the instance type, I believe.
So when the machine comes back up after getting stopped, it'll typically have a new IP address assigned as well, correct? So
yeah, changing IP address is fine. The node reconciles that continuously.
Okay.
The things that would be more difficult are instance ID, things like that. So we're talking about things that would leave the instance ID the same, but would change other significant aspects of the node. So network addresses and resources like memory and CPU, that is continuously reported by the node. So if those change, that's fine. When it starts up, it'll update itself. It would be good to enumerate kind of what the other things are and how we go about reporting those correctly, adjusting those correctly when it comes back up, without necessarily a delete recreate cycle.
Agreed. And I think we're in a better state with the movement of this out of the kubelet, right? Hopefully better state, where we now are starting to request or reconcile more of that information via the Cloud Controller Manager, which should go and fetch that from the API. So it's hopefully in a better state to do that.
Yeah. All right. So if people who are familiar with kind of the AWS specific aspects could describe some of the specific concerns that we want to make sure we don't regress or break, that would be helpful. And then for SIG Cloud, we can kind of agree on the big picture, like what does it mean, for instance, to go away and come back? What are the concerns on the Kubernetes API side? And then each of the providers can figure out what they're currently doing and if there's something different that they can do to kind of reconcile those changed states even without the node object getting stopped.
I think it would also be super helpful to collect up any use cases of why you're stopping the instances, because I think that's something that's definitely been lacking, right? Is to understand what it is, because I think it will help us. So I make a comment to that effect on the issue.
Yeah, I mean, the ones I know of are treating it as a like a hard reboot. I know our ops team, that was what prompted me to go looking for this issue. I didn't realize this had already been reported. They were doing that to get around basically do a hard reboot. And then the other is just idling. So you have instances, you want to idle them and not pay for them, but then bring them back up. And so having those go into not ready state is fine. But you want them to retain all of the topology and taints and stuff that you've set on them. So those are the two I know of.
That is fair, and we can talk more about whether it's better to just bring up a new instance type thing. But yes, and certainly there are definitely like two others that I think there's the my instance might be compromised. I want to go look at it, but take it out of go shut it down, stop it, image the disks type thing. And the other one is I want to change the instance type, which again, maybe you don't do that in Kubernetes, but we should figure out the use cases and figure out what we recommend and what makes sense for when an instance is stopped based on what we expect, I think. Okay.
So do we want to kind of keep commenting on the issue, the kind of main issue, the common handling, or is there an AWS specific one that would make more sense?
Right, because there's two things, right? There's what is the right thing to do for AWS, and then there's separately, and therefore should we also try to make it the same across all providers? And it might be that it doesn't make sense to make it the same across all providers if the use case is like changing instance types or something, which might, you can imagine that some OpenStack might do it live, but like on AWS you have to stop or whatever it is, right? Some differences of that nature.
Yeah, if instance type is part of the fundamental identity of a node, then it seems like that should be part of the ID somehow. Like the two particular interface methods I'm looking at, like the instance exists by provider ID and an ID is passed in, and AWS says, no, this instance does not exist because it found it and it's not in a running state. Like that doesn't seem right. It's also not, I'm not as familiar with AWS to know like what changes when you change instance type. Is that, everything is the same, it's just got more resources or different resources, or like does something else fundamental about it change? So it'd be good for people who do know that about AWS to fill in.
I'm wondering if we should actually do a doc to collect up the use cases, but why don't we coordinate on that issue 46442 and go from there, I guess, right?
All right.
Unless anyone has a different suggestion. But,
and I will try to put something on this next SIG Cloud Provider agenda. See if I can find that.
Yeah, that's. I'm trying to think whether it's exactly the same time. It's Wednesdays. Yeah, I think it's in the other Wednesday. No, I don't know. It's Wednesday afternoon sometime.
Wednesday at 1 Pacific, and the next meeting is, I guess, 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, so.
All right.
Yeah. All right, thanks. That was it.
Awesome, thank you, Jordan. Yeah, it's a tricky one, and there's always the option to make it a cloud provider specific. So AWS has a cloud config file, right, where we can set options like that, and we do that for, some people run their masters in different VPCs, for example, and there's always that option, but it's sort of we risk sort of fragmenting the behavior.
Yeah, if it was something less destructive or less fundamental that the controller was doing, if it was just setting an attribute on the spec or the status or something, then I could see kind of let 1,000 flowers bloom. But when it's something like, well, if this gets reported back, it gets deleted completely. Like that's really difficult to have behave differently.
Agreed. And we can also try to document the interface a little bit better and come with better names, because some of those names don't really explain exactly how they are used, right? And so the contract is more defined by how they are used than even the comments on the methods right now.
Yeah, or comments. I think at the one instance, one of the lookup ones says if it does not exist or is no longer running, and it's not clear if that means like no longer running and will never run again, or doesn't happen to be running at this very instant.
Exactly.
So, all right.
I guess one option would be to define a new node state as well, right? Which would actually surface this, but yeah, we can discuss that more, because then it would be unambiguous.
Yeah, although it would sort of be nonsensical to call the instance exists and have that return false, and then have a different function that said, what is the node state of this non-existent instance, and have it say, oh, well, it's just like hibernating.
Yeah, but I mean, if we had a node status of hibernating, for example, then we could redefine the cloud provider interface, and it could return.
Right. Okay, yeah, I see. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's coordinate on that, and I'll queue this up for sig-cloud. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. What do we got next? Next, Nishi, a community update for sig-aws projects. This is awesome to see. There are lots of them.
Okay, can I talk now? Okay. So yeah, Justin, thanks. I was asked to collate a list of all the sig-aws projects to give a community update next week. So I have the Google Docs ready for everyone to review. I guess you all know about the AWS IAM Authenticator, which was renamed. It's already part of Amazon EKS. I added 2 other projects. One is the LB Ingress Controller, which Craig Amador maintains. We're getting a lot of bugs from multiple customers, specifically Blue Jeans Networks and Freshworks. And if folks from the community can help us, that'll actually be really helpful, because Craig is dealing with all the bugs right now on the LB side. The third project is the AWS encryption provider, which Justin, you and Seth worked on. We had a review with the AWS CryptoBar team internally. There are some open questions as to how reusable the kexts are that are generated by Amazon KMS, and how rotation of the kexts can happen, and basically the scalability of the design that's being proposed. So I think we're work in progress on that section. The fourth project is the CSI driver for EBS. We had a review on the design that was proposed by Jan. There are multiple feature requests made for EBS. Happy to share that Google Doc, but we made some substantial progress on that particular proposal. And the fifth project is the pod identity and access, which Micah gave an update on. There are 2 design proposals, and it's moving towards a final design, I believe. So I think those are the 5 projects I wanted to highlight in the community meeting next week. So I just shared the Google Docs. If anyone has any feedback, any suggestions, please comment, and we'll follow through accordingly.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, the only comment I have is on those last 2. Like there are no links from there for people to follow on from. So it would be great to get links for those. But yeah, thank you. And are you going to give that update next Thursday to the community meetup? Is that right, Nishi?
Yeah, I'll give that update. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I just added the Google Docs for the CSI driver. You all can take a look at all the issues raised, feature requests raised for EBS. We'll be following through on that. And yeah, if anyone wants to get involved in actually building the driver, they're more than welcome.
Thank you. And then it looks like the next item is about your item about the meeting cadence of the CSI driver.
Yeah, so that I'll send the meeting invite. I don't know, Justin, what's the best way to send it out, but I think last week there was an ask to keep the meeting open so people can participate. As of now, I have Jan, Deep, Heyman from Red Hat, and EBS folks attending the meeting. If anyone is interested, I don't know where I can send the meeting invite and people can join.
You can certainly send an email to the sig-aws mailing list. I'm not sure whether you can add the sig-aws Google group, but you could try doing that and seeing whether it worked. But definitely send an email to the sig-aws mailing list, and I would imagine that then interested parties would be able to follow along, even, and just would love to hear about it, even if they're not going to actually join the meeting.
Okay, got it.
And yeah, we had some spam, so the mailing list is currently moderated, but just ping me and I will expedite.
Okay, yeah.
And last item on the agenda, Mr. Eswar.
Yeah, so given that Jordan's here this week, I thought this would be a good venue to bring this conversation up. And it's also related to EKS quite a bit here. So we actually filed an issue with the aggregation API server implementation, which actually, so what happens is any client, anyone who's actually implementing extension API server uses the core piece of the aggregation API server package, and that one today, when it sees that there's no client certificate, bails out right away, right? So basically what this means is extension API servers operating in environments where there's no client cert-based authentication will be non-functional, right? And this impacts EKS quite a bit because EKS uses IAM-based authentication. So we've actually filed the issue and made the fix as well. So the thing I wanted to ask Jordan here is how willing, can this be cherry-picked for the next .10 release, Jordan? How willing are you?
Make sure I'm unmuted. Yeah, once that gets in, I wouldn't see a problem with that getting picked back.
Okay, yeah. So we'll also spend some effort making these changes into the client side of things, like especially the service catalog and then the kube state metrics. All of these actually today are not possible to run in the extension API server mode on EKS. So we'll actually spend some effort there as well once this gets cherry picked. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
That sounds good. That was, yeah.
Yep.
Right. I don't know if anyone else has anything they would like to bring up or is there anything. No, there's nothing else on the agenda. We've reached the end of our agenda. So does anyone want to bring up anything else? Otherwise.
There is a question on the chat.
Oh.
I think the question is, there's a Windows container supported. The question is against CNI Kubernetes issues. Whether there's a plugin that can be used for a Kubernetes cluster with Windows nodes. I'd like to have a master node with Linux and Windows nodes with Windows container. Is it possible? I don't think it's possible today, right?
Where are you seeing this?
I think that might be a private message.
Is that in the?
It's in the chat. Oh, I think it's sent privately to me.
Okay.
Sorry, Chris, I'll respond to you separately on that.
I think off the top of my head, we looked at this a bit, and there'll be a few issues with networking because you need a CNI driver that can talk to the Windows HNS.
Right.
And
Yeah.
on the storage side as well, there are a few quirks.
You're right. I think the issue is raised against VPC CNI Kubernetes. So
Yeah, this is an area of interest for us, and you'll see us spending some effort on this in the near future.
we'll follow up on the issue directly, Chris. That's about it, Justin.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and see you all in 2 weeks.
All right.
Cheers.
Yeah.